When I think about pudding, I think about what I grew up with. And I grew up with something that was in a little plastic container and you peeled the lid off and you took it to lunch. Or it was the treat on a salad bar somewhere for some buffet. And maybe that's your experience with pudding if you grew up in the United States. But that is not what pudding is all over the world, and it's certainly not what pudding was anywhere in the world in the 18th century. Puddings were baked and they were boiled, and they were kind of this way of getting everything that you eat for a meal into one dish and either baking it and boiling it up. We have cooked hundreds, if not thousands, of recipes on this channel, but we don't research recipes just to eat food or just to try to cook them. We research them to learn about people. Everybody eats food, whether you're a high-class person, a low-class person, or somewhere in between. If you're a traveler, if you're a king, if you're a sailor, you eat food. And if we want to understand people, we have to understand their customs. We have to understand what is pushing them to do their day-to-day life in a particular way. So food is one of the best things that we can look at. The important thing is that when you're looking at a recipe and you're trying to learn about history, you have to let the recipe teach you. You can't just come to it with your ideas of what this food should be like or why they're cooking it. You have to let it unfold through the words on the page. So before we get into what this recipe is teaching us, let's talk about the food itself. Puddings in the time period, well, number one, they go back for hundreds and thousands of years. We see Romans using eggs as a binder. And in its most basic form, that's kind of a pudding. It's not necessarily a pudding, but that idea of, hey, these eggs can thicken things and make them stick together, that's been there for a really long time. We do see puddings in medieval times, and we see them moving through the 17th and the 18th and the 19th centuries, and they start to kind of go away in the 19th century and turn into more of a holiday treat or something special, like we see in A Christmas Carol with the plum pudding. But in the 18th century, it's kind of the heyday or the golden era of puddings, and you see so many different types. There are bread puddings, there's carrot puddings, there are rice puddings, there are all sorts of puddings. Some of them are savory and they have meats in them, and they're really like stick to your bones kind of food. Some of them are just like, hey, this is probably all you have, throw it together, it's gonna be a pudding. Today's pudding is a bread pudding, and that's still a pudding that you'll see quite often. Now, you'll see them on a lot of restaurant menus here in the United States, maybe through the East Coast area and the South, probably all over the place. Through my travels, I don't see them a ton in the Midwest, but I do see them in the South, and I look forward to them when I see them on a menu. You can see them kind of getting really fancy, a bourbon glaze or this like really wonderful sauce that accompanies it, and you see that in the 18th century as well. But also, they can be very basic. Today's bread pudding recipe comes out of The Complete Housewife, and that's by Eliza Smith. That's written in 1730, and I liked this recipe. I thought it was interesting that it wasn't a super wet pudding, and that it combines puff paste and a loaf of bread, which maybe you guys have seen a lot, but I hadn't seen, and I thought that might be really cool. We're gonna try it out. So we're gonna dig into this right now. A bread and butter pudding for fasting days. Take a 2-penny loaf and a pound of fresh butter. Spread it in very thin slices as to eat. Cut them off as you spread them, and stone half a pound of raisins, and wash a pound of currants. Then put puff paste at the bottom of the dish, and lay a row of your bread and butter, and strew a handful of currants, and a few raisins, and some little bits of butter, and do so till the dish is full. Then boil 3 pints of cream, and thicken it when cold with the yolks of 10 eggs, a grated nutmeg, a little salt, near half a pound of sugar, some orange flower water, and pour this in just as the pudding is going into the oven. This dish might sound a little complicated, but it's not going to be. We're gonna have an easy time of making this. Anybody's gonna be able to make this at home. First things first, you're gonna get your dish and you're gonna make a puff paste. Now, we've got videos on how to make a puff paste. Just go back and check those out. You're gonna put a layer of that in the bottom of the dish. And then you're gonna take your bread loaf and you're just gonna slice it like you would normally eat a slice of bread, and you're gonna butter it just like you would have bread and butter. But then you're gonna take those and you're gonna put them down on top of the puff paste. Then you're gonna sprinkle your currants and your raisins. You could throw a little bit of butter in there. I don't think that you're gonna need to. Just depends on how much butter you put on your bread. This recipe does want apparently a lot of butter because you're buttering the toast. There's already puff paste, and it wants you to put other little chunks in there. That's a lot. Then you're gonna just continue to layer it like that until the dish is full. At that point, you're gonna boil your cream, and then when you put that on the stove or the fire or whatever you're gonna do, you're gonna continue to stir that the whole time because we don't want the scorch and you don't want the milk to foam over. So you gotta be careful about that. And then you're gonna set it aside to cool down. Wait until the cream is cool enough to put your egg yolks in. You don't wanna cook the egg yolks. We're using them as a thickening agent. You can go ahead and put your salt, your nutmeg, and your sugar in there. I'm not gonna use orange flower water because I don't have any, and I don't think it adds a whole lot to a recipe, but if you want that flavor from citrus, you could use some orange zest at home. Now, depending on how big of a pudding you wanna make, you can cut this recipe, and it's really simple to do that. I think the size that I'm gonna make is gonna take probably 7 egg yolks, so we'll probably do like 2/3 of the recipe. And then we're gonna put it in the oven. If you're doing it at home, I'd say 400-degree oven. It'll take at least an hour. You'll know that it's done because it'll be kind of golden brown on the top. And when you push it, it'll have a little bit of firmness, but remember, this turns into kind of like a custard too. So it is gonna have some jiggle to it no matter what you do it. And you want that. You don't wanna dry this out completely. One tip that I would say is because we have puff paste that's gonna grow, and we got a lot of moisture in this recipe and butter that's gonna melt, I would put this inside of another dish. So you're gonna have your dish, put it inside of like a 9x12 baking dish or something so that if it starts to overflow, it doesn't overflow onto the bottom of your oven and smoke you out of the house. Earlier in this video, I was talking about making recipes from the time period, not just for cooking food and tasting it, but to learn about people and to learn about the time period. Each one of these recipes, if you let it, will give you little breadcrumbs that take you to other places in history. This one in particular is really interesting because this recipe is called a bread pudding for fasting day. I took a deep dive into figuring out what's going on with fasting day, what they're referring to, and some of it is religious. There's a lot of religious fasting that's happening, and you may have grown up with that. It was common practice to have a fast day at the beginning of the planting season. You're gonna spend the day and you're going to pray for a good growing season. And typically at the end of that growing season, they would have a day of Thanksgiving where they would bring in the harvest, they would go hog wild and they would party and they would say, this is what we were fasting for in the very first place. There are other fasts as well. Sometimes kings or the state or whoever has the rule in the area would decree a fasting day. And a lot of times that would be for a particular battle that's coming up, or it would be because of a war that was going on. And they would say, we're gonna set aside this particular day as a humiliation day, as a prayer day, as a fast day. And the expectation was that you would not eat food that you would normally eat. They're not asking you generally to not eat at all, but they are asking you to eat below your means. Most of the time it was a pretty common understanding that you weren't going to eat meat, but also understanding that not everybody could afford meat anyways. Everybody was expected to eat below their normal standards and only enough to kind of get through the day. And so that's why we see a recipe like this come in that is talking about for a fasting day. It doesn't have any meat. It does have some rich stuff like butter and cream. So I'm assuming that this is for somebody that's upper class, but it's still well below their normal standards. Now you might look at it and say, I'm sure that there's a poor family and this pudding that we made is like better than they normally eat. And that's true. But that poor family, they would be eating below their means as well. This is an example of a decree that I found from September 12, 1776, proclamation by the New Hampshire Council and Assembly setting October 10th as a day of humiliation, fasting, and prayer for support of the American cause. We have our finished bread pudding here. It looks fantastic. It smells fantastic. I'm going to try it out. It's got everything that you want. The top of it is kind of crisp and bready. The bottom starts getting a little custardy. It's very eggy, which is, in my opinion, a really good thing. You do not need a pudding sauce for this. It's fantastic. If you have not made a bread pudding, try this at home. Try it today. It is fantastic.